Okay. Okay, we've got the recording set up. Sorry about yesterday. It just seems like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And all we can do is be thankful that we do this 2 days out of the week and not just one. Otherwise, it would be a real mess. But we had a fantastic class yesterday. I'm sorry you missed it, but we're going to have another fantastic class today. And we've got some friends here in the store that are actually going to stay and sew. And welcome to everybody who is not. We were having this conversation a few minutes ago that nowadays the machines are getting so big that it's hard to travel with them. So I'm glad we have the option of doing this. Let me introduce myself. I'm Taya, in case for those of you that don't know. And Chris is also here. Come say hello. Chris Hi. Is the one who makes sure you get everything you need. I just talk about it, but Chris is actually the one that gets it out the door to you. So we also have Robin up front. She is managing our shop hop right now. We have a shop hop going on in the area, and in a week's time, we've already had almost 400 people come through. So it's been super, super busy. If you're in the area ever, just stop by and we will keep a list of the different shops that are in the area if you ever want to come visit. We'd love to have you go visit all of our friends around the area. Okay, we're going to get started today. Last month we did fabric prep, and this month I want to talk about how to get started on these blocks and what we have done, what I've done to make it easier for you to make them. So the first thing we're going to do, is it recording? Oh. The first thing we're going to do is talk about the sashing blocks. So you have a fabric that looks like this. You guys all have a fabric. It looks like this. It has the little dress forms and patterns on it. And that's what we're going to use for the sashing. Now, the original design, if you remember from last month, the original design, this is how they have it set up on the original USB stick. And yes, you will all get the original USB sticks from the Riley Blake ones. We're just waiting for those to come in. But I wanted to get you guys started on these. And originally, you were going to do flip and stitch. That's how the designs are set up. But remember, this part here in the center is supposed to finish at 3.75 inches. This is for the larger wall hanging. This is not for the smaller one. It's for the larger wall hanging. The problem is the first one I stitched out ended up being 3.79. And so it actually stitched into the sashing. And I don't want that. I'm a very precision piecer and I want everything to line up just right. So I took the designs and I did not change them. I just reformatted them on your stick. And the designs now are 2 up on a file. They're still exactly the same. All of the files, the sashing files are numbered sashing 1 through 20. I kept that exact same thing. I just took all of the flip and stitch out. So now you're going to stitch these individual blocks on 6-inch squares of fabric. All right. So the first note you want to make is with this fabric, and this is fabric that you should have put Shape Flex on, Mary Ellen's Best Press and Shape Flex, you're going to cut 6-inch strips. Now, I will follow up with an email to all of you with this information so that you've got it, but you're going to cut 6-inch strips, and you are going to subcut those to 6-inch squares. Now, if you have a 6¼ inch strip, don't subcut it. These are much bigger than you need, but they're not as big as what the pattern told you to cut. They wanted you to cut 10-inch squares. You don't need 10-inch squares. You just don't need 10-inch squares. You need 6-inch squares. Now, if you cut 6-inch strips and you subcut those to 6, you're going to have 42 squares. You only need 36 for this part. And here's my philosophy on quilting, anything. If I cut extra, I'm not going to need them. But the minute I cut exactly the number I need, I'm going to want more. So think about it as well. We've got 40 of these that we have to stitch out. And you are somewhere along the way, you are going to punch a hole. You're going to break a needle, you're going to run out of thread, you're going to do something wrong, your machine's going to misbehave, and you're going to need to do more. So having 42 squares is not a bad thing. You only need 36 for this part, and then you're going to need, and the patterns will tell you in the book as you get to them, you will have 4 files that look like this. They'll be on the background only, and then they will be on a different color fabric. So let's look over here for just a second. You've got 4 blocks. Do you see the corner blocks on this? You've got 4 blocks that actually have a different fabric on the background. And then you add an applique piece of fabric. You add this fabric. You're going to add this fabric in the middle of the block. So you've got 4 blocks like that. And the first file actually has one of these in it so that you can practice both the stitching only and then the ones with the background, okay? So just know you've got 4 like this, and the instructions are very clear about what those fabrics are as you get to them. Now, one of the things about these blocks is that they are very stitch intensive. And so the good news is you don't have to worry about fabrics, but they take upwards of 30 to 35 minutes per square. So it is a 75-minute stitch out when you turn it on and bring your file in. When you turn your machine on and bring your file in, it'll say 60 to 75 minutes, depending on what brand machine and how fast you run it. One of the things we talked about yesterday was everybody is pretty leery about running their machine at full speed. They're like, no, I'm only going to run it at half speed. Your machines are designed to run fast. Every technician will tell you that. Aaron will tell you, he kind of chuckles when people say, yeah, I only run it at half speed. Why? I mean, there's no speed limit. It's not like we have a speed limit. So if you have a machine that's going to run faster, let it run. Let it run as fast as it will safely run. If you're uncomfortable with it, run it slower, but I'm just letting you know that you can run it faster if you want to. So you're going to do 40 of these. Now let's talk about stabilizers. One of the things about heavy stitch outs is they pull. So if everybody understands pulling, that just means that as it stitches, it makes the block smaller. And if you don't have enough stabilizer behind the stitching, it will pull. So how you know that you have the correct stabilizer is it doesn't pull. So for example, the first thing that we're going to do, I'm going to just walk you through how this is going to stitch out. The first thing it's going to do, here's my hoop. And I don't know that you all can see it on the screen, but what I did was when I set these up, I digitized them so that it does a placement line. And that placement line is 4 1/4 inches square. That's the size that we're going to square it up to. Maybe it's 3.75. I think it's 3.75. It's not what we're squaring it up to. It's just the size of the block. So that's going to tell you where to put your 6-inch square. You're going to place your 6-inch square on it, and then it's going to double run, which means it's going to go around twice to secure your fabric piece to the stabilizer. And then it's going to stitch it out. You're going to go to block number 2, and if you have a 6-inch square and there's a little bit of fabric left here, just flip it up and tape it or put a pin in it so that it doesn't get caught up in the second stitch out, okay? Ask me how I know this. I had several that were connected and I had to fix that. So you're going to do the second stitch out and do exactly the same thing. It's going to do a placement line, then it's going to do a double run when you put your fabric down, and then you're going to stitch it out. Now, the trick is, and so when I started doing these, I thought, okay, we've got to have 2 layers of tearaway stabilizer. And we use a 1.8 ounce crispy. Crispy is the key here because the crisper the stabilizer, the easier it tears out when you're done. So we have what's called a crisp tearaway, 1.8 ounces. Sometimes we have 1.5. Regardless, you've got to have 2 layers when you're doing the sashing blocks. Now, when I set this all up, I cut a double layer. I cut one that's big enough to put in my hoop twice. Well, I realized later that's kind of a waste. All I need is 1 layer in the hoop, and then take a scrap piece that is smaller and just tape it to the back of your hoop. Once you know where your placement line is, just tape it to the back. The second layer of stabilizer does not have to be in the hoop. It just needs to be part of what you're stitching. Does that make sense to everybody? So you can save quite a bit of stabilizer by doing it that way. We learned that from Claudia Donnell and Claudia's Creations. She's an awesome designer and really understands the techniques behind embroidery. So again, you don't have to have 2 layers hooped, but you need to have 2 layers that you're stitching through. So that's on the blocks, on the sashing blocks. And people yesterday were asking, what about this design? And this particular one, I will send the pattern out for this. This is your first bonus project. This takes 41 blocks. So one of the blocks you're going to want to stitch twice. And someone yesterday said, why would we ever want to make 2 of these? And I said, because look how beautiful this quilt is. I just can't believe how beautiful it turned out. So I'm thrilled with it. I love small quilts. I haven't done small quilts for a while, so it was kind of fun to do this one. And here's what you're going to do when you finish. You're going to have a 6-inch square, and you are not going to square that up. You are not going to square it up. We don't do any squaring up until the end. So do not come to class or show me, look, I have all my squares, squared up. We do everything at the end. So your job right now is to make them. Now, I want to show you. I want to talk about a couple of things on the sashing block. So you can see how pliable this is because we were easily able to pick the stabilizers out on the backs of these. And I'm going to pass this around so you can see. Do not pull my little one out of the middle. That's your sample to show you. We do have, if you have tweezers that have the curve on the end with a really sharp point, those are fantastic for pulling these out. So if you need some, let us know. We've got them. But this is what the blocks look like. And this one has been squared up. So just remember, you're going to have more fabric all the way around. And you will clean off the stabilizers off the back, and then you'll make a pile. And as you quilt them, they'll be about this tall. I would love to do a time lapse of all of them stitching out and piling up, because the funnest part for me was when I had all 40 squares done or 41 squares done, and we had this nice little pile. It just felt so good to have them all done. So you're going to pull out your basting stitches, pull out your stabilizer, and then just make a stack. Do not square them up. They should be 6 inches until we get ready to square them up. Okay. All right. With that said, I also want to talk about a couple of things on stitching. So I don't know what size needles you guys normally use. The book calls for 75/11s. Which is way too small, in my opinion. So it's just an opinion. Some of you may go with the 75/11s. I like the 90/14s. Yesterday, the general consensus was 90/14s. The polyester threads that we're using, either some of you are using Glide, some of you are using Isocord, most of you are using Isocord. They really like the 90/14 needle. They don't like a smaller needle. But you will know what works for your machine. And here's how you can tell if your needle is too small. Your thread shreds, your thread breaks, you get looping on the top. You've seen where you get looping on the top. That can sometimes be a tension issue, but a lot of times it's a needle issue. So I'd like all of you to promise me that you're going to start out with a fresh needle and that you're going to switch to a larger size needle if you find the 75/11 isn't working. I don't even use 75/11s when I'm piecing. I don't know. I just have found that always to be a little too small. First of all, I can't see the hole to put the thread through. All right. So we're going to use we're going to use a 90/14 needle. Now, I like our store. We like the titanium coated ones because when you're stitching this much, the needle tends to get hot and it can bend, and the titanium coated or the chrome, what do they call them now? Chrome coated? I can't say that. Yeah. Chrome coated, those tend to not bend and warp as much. So keep that in mind. But you're going to be doing a lot of stitching, so you might have to change your needle a couple of times during this whole process. All right. So that's about the sashing blocks. I'll give you the instructions for the sashing. What do you call that? The fabric that goes in between? Whatever it is when we get done. the sashing strips to put it all together at the end. We're just going to focus right now on stitching. Our fourth class, the last class, in fact, I think we're going to add a class. The last class is going to be putting it all together. And I have some very specific, helpful instructions for you on how not to mess this up. Okay, so for example, right now, we're working on a quilt that has, it's called a Prairie Point Square. And when we made it, I'll have Chris grab it for me. Can you grab those 2 squares?
Yeah, and that's gonna make it.
Oh, no worries.
It must be Aaron's.
When we do this block, one of the things that happened is it came out bigger. So they said, you know, in the perfect world, it would have been 14.5 inches. Well, if we had done 14.5 inches, we would have cut the corners off. This is beautiful. This is an AccuQuilt program or project, and we pre-cut all of the star points, and people just had to sit down and put them together. But we ended up having to make this 15 inches, so we didn't cut the star points off. Well, there's a companion block that goes with it. Isn't that too cute? This is the embroidery part. And so we sized up this block so that it lined up with this block. So we're going to talk about that when we go to put things together. I say the way I work with patterns is they're only a suggestion until you get to the end and you have to, you know, the rubber meets the road and you have to put these all together. So yes, we have a target of 55 by 63, but I can guarantee you that no 2 people in here are going to have the same size quilt top. I just know that. So be aware that when we go to do the finishing stuff, I'm going to have some helpful tips and tricks for you to get going on putting it together. In the meantime, you're just going to stack all of your sashing blocks, and you should have 40 of those. Somebody yesterday said, do we have to have those all done by next month? Absolutely not. That is a whole lot of sewing. I think we figured out just by the quilting time on my machine that it's about 45 hours of stitching time. Now, that's going to vary depending on what machine you're using and, you know, how many times the dog wants to go outside, or, you know, somebody wants dinner, or you have laundry, whatever. But there's quite a bit of stitching time. So my suggestion is you can probably do, in an easy evening, you can do 2 blocks, 2 of the sashing blocks, because they take 75 minutes roughly per, per file. So you could do a couple of those. Now, the nice part is they stitch for quite some time. So if you're comfortable walking away from your machine, or at least being, working on something else, you can be doing 2 things at once. But you're gonna be able to get these done. Now, I also want to talk about threads for a second. So one of the things about, so I've always been what I would call a lazy embroiderer. And by that, I just mean, I'm just going to toss white in the bobbin and I'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Well, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. In this particular stitch out, the way these are digitized, if you don't have a similar value of bobbin thread, it's going to pull to the top. And it's a function of the fill stitches that they used. They're very beautifully digitized, absolutely beautifully digitized. They stitch out beautifully. They're incredibly consistent, but some areas are very thick and your machine will pop. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that when you get a really dense area. It actually lifts your hoop and it will pop as the needle goes through. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a function of it. But I had to redo a couple of blocks because I thought, I'm just going to leave that white stuff in there. Or I had black in one time. I don't, it's just like, there's a full bobbin. I'm just going to toss that into my machine. Well, I put the black in and all of a sudden I had black all through here. I'm like, no. So that's why we recommended 4 different colors. And you'll notice that we have a white, a black. Did we do black? I don't think we have black in this one. No, there's no black in this one. There is a dark. Champagne. There's a champagne, which oh my gosh, I never knew that champagne was so good. Well, I mean, I know it tastes good, but I never knew it was such a great color. It is the chameleon color. It is the color that takes on value. It's not just about the color. It actually will go to the value medium or dark or light that it's with. The other one, there's a lot of green, not in the sashing so much, but when we get to the houses, there's a lot of green leaves and you have to have a green in the bottom. You have the best chance of success with that. So I think we have all the white and champagne out to you. We have a couple more people that need the sage, the green and the blue, and we're working on that. We had initially thought we would have 10 to 12 people in this class, and we had 48. So we've cleaned out every warehouse, so they're all saying, please don't call us again. I'm kidding. Everybody's happy. We're all happy, but we have a couple of loose ends that we need to tie up. So you want to make sure, for example, on this block, and I don't know which one this is, but we use the champagne color for both the red and the corner. So just be aware, and I would pre-fill some bobbins with both colors or with all the colors until you get to where you're actually stitching. Champagne, I'm guessing, is going to be the one that you use the most. That's just my guess. But so that's that. Okay, I think you have, unless there are any questions, I think you guys have a really good plan for moving forward. Oh, I will give you, I'm working right now on the conversions from the Robinson Anton to Isacord, so that you've got those. You'll get that in an email, and it'll list both of them, Robinson Anton and Isacord. If you're doing Glide, I can probably help you with that conversion. Just call me and let me know. All right. But these files, the sashing files, will fit in a MIDI hoop. Did I size these for a MIDI hoop, or was it I think I sized them for a MIDI hoop. It doesn't matter. They're formatted. If you have any problems, call. We have all the formats on the stick. So if you've got any questions, anything that you need, let us know and we'll help you. Okay. If there aren't any questions about
Taya?
Yes.
I have a question. This is Debbie. Hi. So we're only working on sashing. We're not working on the applique blocks. Is that correct?
That's not correct. I was just going to go
Oh,
right.
I'm sorry.
No,
I thought you said you were done. Okay. All right. Go ahead. All right.
I can't talk about these anymore. You just need to get stitching. There's nothing else I can say.
Okay. So you're on something else. Okay. I'm sorry.
No, please don't apologize. You guys keep asking. I think we have 15 people on Zoom today, so that's really good. Yeah. All right. So everybody should be pretty good with the sashing. Now, I want to talk about the house blocks because there are 12 of those. You are not going to do them all at the same time. Remember, this is not a race. It's a journey. You want to enjoy the process. And so what we're doing is giving you the helpful hints and tips at the beginning to help you get going. Okay, so let's talk about these. One of the things that I missed, and I apologize, is I had you put shape flex on these two fabrics on the back for the grass. And I missed that there are actually 4 grasses. So you need to find the other 2 greens, and I'll send a picture so that you know which ones to look for. And we're going to add shape flex onto the back of those. All right. Now, on page 14 of your book, if you'll go to page 14 of your book, you will notice that they square up the house blocks to 11 inches. Is that correct? I mean, is everybody seeing that same thing? All right. So they square them up to 11 inches. However, in the cutting instructions at the beginning of the book, they tell you to cut an 11-inch square of your background. Here's why that doesn't work for me. If there's any pull from the embroidery, you're not going to have 11 inches when you're done. So here's what you're going to do for the background. Sorry, I dropped something. Your background squares, I want you to write this down because this is how I want you to cut your background squares for this part. This is the top part of the house. So when you...
The backing of the house?
This is, yes, this is the background of the house. So when you look at it, it's this part here, all right? You don't need this much height-wise. So 11 inches this way is a waist, and 11 inches this way is not enough. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to take your background fabric, you're going to cut 3 12-inch strips. And you're going to subcut those to 4 10-inch sections so that you end up with 12 10 by 12-inch pieces of background.
12-inch strips.
You're going to cut 3 12-inch strips, and out of each strip, you're going to get 4 10-inch sections. So that you end up with 12 10 by 12 pieces. Now, here's the only problem with that. You are not allowed to make any mistakes because we have 12 houses and you now have 12 pieces of fabric. Just kidding. Okay, so we're going to go 12-inch width so that we have enough to square up. I don't know what happened there, but it doesn't matter to me as long as we're all on the same page and I give you a little bit extra room. Okay, so you can see that when we put these together to begin with, raise this up a little bit, this bottom grass part is actually sewn to the upper house part. Does everybody see that? The question is, how do you do that? So the first stitch that goes across is a placement line. The second stitch across is your seam line. So I'm taking a piece of grass and I'm taking a background square and I'm putting them together, right sides together. And then I am putting them in my hoop. I'll do it in this one so you can see. I'm putting them in my hoop like this. So I've got a placement line across here. I'm going to set this on it. These are going to match up. And magically, it's going to sew another line that is a 1/4 inch above. And then you're going to flip this down. All right, so it's going to stitch it for you. Here's the deal. You have to make sure your grass is on the right side of the block. Because if you don't, you're going to take it out and you're going to have to stitch it again because your grass will be in the sky. It'll be in the air. So you'll probably only do that one time. I'm expecting that pretty much everybody's going to sew it on the wrong direction one time. Maybe not on the first block, maybe on a different block, but you're going to do it. And here's the trick. So to fix that, what do you do if you need to take this out and do it again? On the back side, put a piece of Scotch tape all across that 1/4 inch seam. Tear it off and do it again. You don't have to rehoop. You just, I don't know how many of you have ever done paper piecing, but when I first started learning paper piecing, I mean, I'll be darned if I didn't get the angle the wrong direction almost every single time. And I finally learned you just put a piece of tape across where the mistake, you know, the seam that you sewed, you tape it, rip your fabric off, orient it the right direction, and sew it again. Okay, so that's the trick for making sure. But you're going to sew this and then it's going to flip down and now you're ready for your applique pieces. Okay, does that make sense? Yes. I'm just going to tell you that. So the question was, what size do you cut these grass pieces? The grass pieces are going to get cut 4 inches by 12 inches and you need 3 of each color. It's not. That's why you're here. That's why I said bring paper.
Because
it's not in the book.
We changed the size.
Well, I didn't change the size of the blocks. The blocks are exactly the same size. I changed the cuts because I didn't think they were the right cuts. I was not comfortable with an 11-inch square. You just didn't have enough room, and we didn't need the height because we've got the grass on the bottom. We needed the width, so I'm switching it because I want you to have the right.
So the 10 is going to be this way, and
the 12 is going to match up with the 12 inches here. So that was the question yesterday. How do we make sure we get those on there correctly? And you're going to match the length. That's why I had you cut these 12 inches because then it's easy to know which way you're going to go with it. All right, so you're going to have 4 colors of green. And you're going to cut 3 4 by 12 inch pieces of each green. All right. That's going to help you know on your background which way to orient it. Don't put the 10-inch side. Don't put the 10-inch side on here. If you've got extra fabric left over, I would rethink that before you stitch anything. Otherwise, you might as well just get the Scotch tape out and leave it out because you're going to end up restitching it. Okay. So does that make sense to everybody? Are we good? So you'll notice that I have selvage on here. I really don't care. I just leave it. I don't ever cut selvage off until I need to. It just doesn't matter. But if you have this on here correctly, if you have it on here correctly, it's going to line up and you're going to have a 12-inch strip of green with a 12-inch strip of background. All right. And some people were asking, well, why do you have just this plain piece? Because I was practicing. I had some leftover fabric from 20 years ago. Actually, it was longer than that. It was 30 years ago. I used to piece quilts for Benartex. Back in the day, I would be a sample maker for them, and they always paid me in fabric. And I realized this year that I still had fabric from back then, and I said, okay, that's got to go. I cannot buy any new fabric unless I get rid of some of the stuff I've had for 30 years. So my sewing room is looking pretty good these days. Okay, so that's how you're going to put these on. Now, stabilizer for the house blocks. You only need one layer. They are not dense. You have some dense satin stitching around the edge, but it is not a dense stitch out like the sashing blocks. So the house blocks, you just need one layer of crispy tearaway in your hoop. Now, with that said, if you see or feel like it's pulling, then slide a piece of stabilizer underneath it. Here's the difference between the house blocks and the sashing blocks. The sashing blocks have to be very precise, finish at 3.75, square up to 4 1/4. We have very little margin, very little room for that to be a mistake, which is the other reason why I took them out of the stitch and flip, and we're just going to stitch them out. I'd rather sew a piece of sashing fabric between them than fight that. The other thing to remember on the sashing blocks was if we stitched out the first one 45 minutes and then started on the second one and had a problem, you've just now lost the whole thing and have to start over. So I'm much more about doing them individually. That's just my choice. So that's how we're going to do it. Now, you can do it however you want, but that's how I'm going to do it. Okay. The other thing on the houses, we need to talk about the applique. Go ahead.
How many, 4 greens, 4 different greens?
4 different greens, 3 of each gives you your 12. 4 different greens. I'm going to bring those up close and personal, and I'll send you a picture of the other 2 that you need to do. We had you do these 2, but you need to do these 2 as well. I don't know why I was thinking it was only 2 colors. Maybe
They just all have the same brows.
well, I think it's more a case of there's 109 pages and I lost interest about page 4. I have a very short attention span, so if I can see it, I'll do it, but I obviously missed that one. So you just have a couple more that you need to add shape flex to the back and then cut your 4-inch by 12-inch pieces. And that's plenty. That's plenty. Okay. So we've covered stabilizers. Let's talk about appliques. Appliques have turned out to be one of my very funnest ways of doing embroidery. I love applique. You all can't see it on Zoom, but behind you and behind Chris, is the Simple Blessings, and that's by Bonnie Sullivan. And that's all handwork. That's all hand stitching. And I don't do hand stitching anymore. So I digitized it, and now it is embroidery, and it's beautiful. And it is my, hands down, one of my favorite pieces ever. I just love it. So applique is something that you have to wrap your brain around a little bit, but I'm going to give you some really helpful, easy hints to do it without thinking. So the first thing I want you to know, and I want you to write down, every single applique is like this. You've got 3 steps. Step number 1 is what's called a placement line. Step number 1 is a placement line. What does that mean? That tells you where the piece of fabric is going to go down. Step number 2 is called a tack down line. So once you have your piece of fabric, and I'll talk about that in a second, once you have your piece of fabric, you stitch out your placement line, you put your piece of fabric on top, try and make sure that it covers the whole thing, or the Scotch tape's coming back out and we're going to have to stitch it again. If you happen to put a piece of fabric down over a placement line and you stitch the tack down and it moves and you don't have it underneath there, you must take it off and do it again. You cannot cheat on this. This is the one place in embroidery you can't cheat on. That fabric has to cover the entire line, period, end of sentence, not negotiable. Okay, so that fabric has to be over that. One way to do that is to use paper tape. It's called paper tape. What do we call it? Tack down tape? We have a brand tack down. It's paper tape, and you just tape it down so it doesn't shift. Or you can try holding it with your fingers, but
Is that what that washi thing is? The washi tape in here?
no. Well, that's what they call it, but we have a different.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a different version. Ours is called tack down. It's just paper tape that Kimberbell puts it out. We have a brand. A lot of people have it, and it's really nice. So you can tape it in, stitch your line, and then you need to have a pair, not these particularly, although I like this brand because I can resharpen these, but this is Havel. You've got to have curved scissors to trim. And when you trim, you're going to take the hoop off the machine. I have seen so many people try and save time by trimming in the hoop on the machine, and it's just not worth it. So take your hoop off, trim your fabric, and then put it back in. And stitch number 3 is going to be the finishing stitch. 99.9% of the time, that's either going to be a blanket stitch or a satin stitch. What's cool about these Riley Blake designs is they've got some fancy schmancy satin stitches around the designs. They're gorgeous. They're absolutely beautiful. So I was very happy with that. And that is the only thing that would have you put another piece of stabilizer behind it, is if you start seeing that is pulling on your machine. Every machine is different. Every hoop is different. It's amazing how many options you can have. But just watch for that. If you see it starting to pull. Now I will say, and I'll give you an example of this. I will say that these Riley Blake designs, their satin stitching is at least 4 millimeters wide. So if you are not familiar with cutting fabric for applique and you do have a little bit, off, or you think it's pulling out, you don't have to worry, because it's a really wide satin stitch. It's a really wide satin stitch. So that's a really good part about that. Now, I want to talk about the fusible that we put on the fabrics that we're going to use for appliques. Okay. So back in the day when I knew everything, I've grown up since then, and now I realize I know nothing. I have a lot to learn. But back in the day, I did a quilt. Shawnee, are you able to reach that up there to pull that down? I did a Baltimore quilt with Claudia Donnell, and I never finished it. And I'm going to tell you why I never finished it. This is the border, and it's absolutely a beautiful, beautiful border. I don't know how much you can see. And every time Claudia comes to visit and do a workshop, she says, "Have you finished that beautiful Baltimore quilt yet?" And I keep having to say no. And she says, "Why not?" I said, "I don't know. There's something about it that's bugging me." Well, I finally figured out that what's bugging me is back in the day when I knew everything, I said, I'm not putting fusible on the backs of my fabrics because it makes them stiff. And that was before I knew much about that. And I think we were using steam-a-seam in those days. And steam-a-seam for appliques, stay as far away from it as possible. Steam-a-seam is a fabulous product when it's used correctly, but you can't stitch through it on embroidery. It gums up your needle. It plays havoc with the tension. And that's all we had at the time. So I said, I know better. I'm not going to do it. And so I don't have any fusible behind any of these fabrics. So what happens if you don't put a fusible behind the applique fabric is it bubbles. So when you look at this, it's not smooth and flat. But here's the really bad part. All of these edges are now pulling out from underneath the stitching. So even if I finish this, I can't ever use it because all of the, so do you see what I mean? When you have a straight line, sometimes it's better, but when you have curved lines, it's all bias and all the threads become very loose. So what the Heat and Bond is the brand that we use, but what the fusible does is it seals all of those threads together. It's not as much about it sticking as it is about sealing the fabric so that when you cut it and stitch through it, it doesn't pull out. Does that make sense? So once somebody took the time to explain that to me, I'm like, oh, I knew that. No, I didn't say that really. I just said, oh, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. So the thing to know as well, there's two things. Number one, always remember to take the paper off the back of fabric before you get started. Otherwise, you have a crinkle quilt, and crinkle quilts are great for babies, but we don't need one. So don't forget to take the fabric off the back. And then I want you to be super, super careful. One of the things that breaks my heart is when I go to a quilt show and I see an absolutely stunning machine embroidery quilt, and they have ironed it, and all the threads are flat and melted. They're not designed to, the threads that we're using are polyester, and they melt and they flatten when you iron them. So the fusible the fusible part of this, everyone's like, oh, I'm going to put that down and then I'm going to iron it. No, we're trimming around. So you don't need to iron anything on these. The only ones that you iron on in our realm are the AccuQuilt ones where we've cut the shape and it has to fit exactly, but we're ironing those before thread, right? We're ironing those before thread. So my way of doing this is I do all of my machine embroidery and then I flip it over and I iron it from the back when I'm all done. You can iron from the front, but heaven forbid you don't put a pressing cloth on the top of it. So I almost always have two layered. There's a muslin half yard cut around here somewhere that travels with me, and I put that on the top. Even so, any heat on the top or weight is going to flatten that thread. And what we're aiming for on a satin stitch is to get that really nice dimension. And you lose that when you put an iron to it. So please promise me on this project, you are not going to put an iron to the front of your quilt blocks until you're completely done. And when you're done with the block, press it from the back. Press it from the back. All right. That's just, so here's I have 4 of these made. I have the borders all done, ready to go on. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to finish this. I probably still have, I don't know, 50 hours of work to do because that's the other thing. I don't ever just make it the size it's supposed to be. So this is supposed to be 60 by 60. Well, I wanted it queen size. So I've got a lot of embroidery and I just have to decide what to do with it. Thank you, Miss Shani.
What temperature should we iron?
Oh, great question. What temperature should you iron? Most of them, this is the product that we like the best. It's called Heat and Bond Light. And this is what I like for appliques. Wonder Under, and I'll get back to your question here in just a second. Wonder Under is the other product. It's more of a web, like it was sprayed on paper. This is more solid and it's easier, in my opinion, it's easier to work with. Wonder Under or this, either one, but this is the brand that we like the best. And all of the instructions will tell you what temperature to iron at, except for this one. Let's see. Place material adhesive side down to hold for 6 seconds. Medium heat for this one. Yeah, no temperature, just medium heat. Mine's on cotton all the time. I never change the temperature on my iron. Yeah. The other thing that I like the small irons, but in this case, we're not using it to press anything. So really use a bigger iron plate, like a full-size Rowenta or something like that to iron it from the back when you're done. If you feel like it's not fusing, you can spray it with water, just mist it. But I will tell you again, I have this conversation almost every time. If you live in Portland, especially, or if you're on well water, do not put water in your irons unless you have an ironing system like a Laura Star. Don't put water in your irons. They've got parts that rust and then they spit at your project and you don't want to put all this time into it and then have it come apart. Okay, so how do we do the appliques? I have 2 things left to talk about, appliques and threads for this project. So appliques, here's how I do it. They have sizes listed in your book of what size squares to cut. They're about 10 times too big. So what I do is I stitch the outline, right? The placement line. I stitch the placement line. I take a piece of my fusible, I put it over that and I cut it out. And then I iron that to the fabric. So I don't need to worry about, oh, do I need a 4x5? Do I need a 5x7? Do I need a 3.5 by, whatever. I just take my fusible and I put it on top of the placement line, cut around it, and then iron it to the fabric. Now, yesterday we had quite the conversation because several people said, well, I always take my fabric and cut it to size and then put my fusible on the back. I used to do that too until I one day realized I was ironing fusible on my ironing board cover because it's easier to cut the fusible to the right size and then iron it to a piece of fabric with the fabric all the way around, right? Are you seeing what I'm saying? I'm not cutting my pieces down. I just iron it to the back and then I trim it out. It's easier and cleaner to do it that way than it is to cut the fabric and try and get a fusible piece for the back. So that's just how I do it. You can do it however you want. If you want to read the instructions oh my gosh, did I just say that? If you want to read the instructions and cut your pieces of fabric to size, you can do that, but I just find it easier to do it this way. So whatever works for you, but you've got to get fusible on the back of the fabric pieces, and you do not iron them down. You're going to stitch out your tack down, trim it, and then stitch your finishing. Okay. Now on some of them, like this one, I don't know if you can see it, the finishing stitch doesn't go all the way across because we've got other parts that are going to go in there. So if it, don't call me and say, my finishing stitch didn't go all the way across the bottom. I know you're not done yet. You're not done. You got to do some more. Okay, now let's talk about threads for a second. They called for 20? Yeah, they called for 20 thread colors. And this is the other thing that is very subjective. I have found when someone says to me, okay, you need green thread. Okay, would that be blue green? Would that be yellow green? What color is that? So in this particular project, we've got two distinctly different colors of green. I'm going to try and show you what this looks like. Do you see how this one is more of a green and this one is more of a teal green? So they did not put a thread color in for this green. They used a teal green, and the first block I stitched out, I went, oh, heck no. Heck no. So we added Isocord 5833, which is, in my opinion, nature's green. That's the best green color ever. I mean, if you come in and ask me what color green should I use, I don't even care what it is. I'm going to tell you 5833. And then they use a different color green. Same thing with the pinks. I'm going to just show you here on the pink. The pink fabrics are all very soft and muted, and they used a very clear pink thread. So I'm sure there's a place where I'm going to use that clear pink thread, but I didn't like it on this one. So you can't see probably the color, but this green is more of the true green, and the color that was slated for it was the green, was the teal. So I look at this and I go, ooh, that's a real conflict. So I'm going to suggest to you how I'm going to approach this is I'm going to go through and open the file, bring it into my machine. I will pull the fabrics that they tell me to pull, and then I'm going to match my threads to the fabric, because the reason I didn't finish this one is because this is not the right green thread for this fabric, and this is not the right pink thread for this fabric. In my opinion, it's just opinion. So if you're okay if you're one of those people that really likes to just follow the instructions step by step, then that's perfect. If you're one of these people that wants to match your threads to the fabric, that's perfect. It doesn't matter what you do. I just want to give you a heads up that maybe those thread colors are not the right match for how that's going to play out. I want my stuff. I'm kind of a matchy person, and heaven forbid that you tell me I have to do something scrappy, because I just can't handle it. It has to be organized. Okay, so the other thing I want to tell you is that mostly you're going to have darker thread colors than the fabric. I've just learned, I don't even know where this came from or why I would say this, but I have developed a preference. Let's say it that way. I have developed a preference for my for my threads to be at least the same or one shade darker than what I'm appliquing on. Now, the exception to that is I kind of like the house color that they did, and it's lighter. But if you look at this little piece right here, it's darker, and I like that too. So just be aware, and whatever color is on your spool of thread is pretty much what it's going to look like when it's on the fabric. So you can really take that thread color, put it with your fabric, and make sure it's the match that you want. Okay. So all I'm suggesting is that you be a little bit decisive about what you want versus what the pattern is telling you color-wise. Okay. Now, when you do these appliques, we're going to stitch out 3 lines, right? We're going to do placement, tack down, and finishing stitch. When they come into your machine, those 3 colors are going to be different. Do you all understand why? Because it has to stop between to let you put the fabric down and to trim it. But in truth, it's all the same color. So when you go to do an applique, actually forward through the colors and see what the finishing stitch is going to be. And that's what you're going to put in. If I hear of anybody that puts 3 different colors of thread in to do an applique, we're going to have a little chat. It's all the same color, but on your machine is going to show up as 3 different thread colors because it has to stop to let you put the fabric down. It has to stop to let you trim, and then it's going to go ahead and stitch out. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Any questions about that? Okay. All right, so you're going to get started on your houses. You're going to get started on your sashing blocks. And then I'm going to have next month, we're going to focus on how far everybody's gotten. And I will have another project, another bonus project for you to do. You'll have a chance. Some people have said, you know, if I'm going to stitch out all these sashing blocks at 3.75 inches, I'm going to do 2 of them at a time because it's just as easy. It's easier to do 2 sets of these as you go than it is to do 1 full set and then another full set. Does that make sense? Are you following? So if you've got the file open on your computer, go ahead and stitch out 2 sets because then you're halfway. You've got 1 set that's going to go for your bonus project. You've got 1 set that's going to go for your bonus project, and you've got 1 set that's going to go for your quilt. Okay.
So 80 is just as fast.
80 is just as fast as 40. Oh, wait, it's 81. Oh, yes. It's 81. Okay. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay.
But the 2 that are on
the 2 that are on your file
are different ones.
They're different. There's 2 different blocks in each file.
But we print that same one twice.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So you have 20 files. You have 20 sashing block files, and each file has 2 squares in it.
Yeah.
So, you know, you might as well just go ahead and stitch it out twice. I mean, what the heck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tanya,
Yes.
I had a question earlier. You mentioned in the beginning that you resized the blocks so that you didn't.
I did not resize them. What I did was I took them out of this format with the
Right.
and the stitch and flip, and I just made them individual files. So
Okay, would that be on the 1 stick or an additional stick?
we sent you the stick with the revised files, and you will get the Riley Blake one here shortly.
Okay, I got nothing so far. That's why I asked.
Linda Schaefer?
Yep.
Everything went out on Thursday. What we had left to ship went out on Thursday, so you should be getting it soon. If you have, we always email tracking information. If by chance you didn't get it, it might have gone to your trash, but you are welcome to call Chris and get that tracking information so you know when it's going to arrive on your doorstep.
Okay, I'll be a little more patient. Thank you.
Oh, no, just I'll have Chris email you the tracking information so you know when it's going to arrive.
Okay.
We have people all the way across to New York, into Florida, and down to California. So we're very, very happy to be sharing this across the country.
Is that for both sticks? Because I don't have either one of them yet.
You're going to get this. You're going to get the stick with the revised files first, and then you're going to get the Riley Blake one next.
Okay, because I thought you just said everything had been mailed out, but I don't have either one of them yet.
Everything but the Riley Blake.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Everything but the original Riley Blake one. All of these have been shipped out. All of the revised files so that you can get started sewing.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Taya, if we stitch 2 of each so we can make the bonus project, we have enough fabric to do both of them?
You're going to need a separate. So I don't know if you can see, but I actually use just a solid cream to do this.
Okay.
So if you've got, this is a good time to dig into your stash. You need, I'm going to say you need right at just under 2 yards for doing this, because you need a yard for this, and then you're going to need maybe a yard and a half. You're going to need to have the squares for the sashing blocks.
So we hoop them separately then, even if we're making 2, we hoop 1 for the project and 1 for the bonus project?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So this will come out to you. And here's what's interesting about this when I got it done before I had it quilted. All of this stuff, all these sashing strips and the corner blocks, I didn't put shape flex on. So it was really loosey-goosey. You know, it just kind of flopped around because the blocks were really stiff and this wasn't. And I thought, oh my gosh, did I make a mistake by not putting shape flex on this. Well, once it went on the long arm and got stretched just a little bit, and my sweet husband quilted it for me, it came out beautiful. So we can talk more about whether, because we're going to have that conversation when we go to put the quilt together. We can talk more about whether you should put a shape flex in here to get the weight of the fabric that we're sewing together the same. But then you have to remember it's going to add bulk. So I'm on the fence about that. If anybody else has an opinion about it, let us know, and we can bring that up next class. But I love this. Dave said, well, when are you going to bring that home and hang it on the wall? And I said, well, maybe next year. Right now I like it.
I was just confused because you said to stitch out 2 at the same time. So I thought we were doing 2 of the same
fabric. You're going to do the same file, but you're going to do one fabric for your bonus project.
Okay.
And fabric for the quilt. Great question.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else?
Run out of fabric real quick.
Yeah, otherwise you'd run out of fabric real quick. That's right. Okay. Any other questions? All right. I think you guys have enough information to be dangerous and to get started on your machines. Please remember, if you're having any problems with your machines, like yesterday we had somebody sewing. What was the problem? Was there a needle?
Bobbin sensor.
It
kept saying her bobbin.
It kept saying that her bobbin was out, and it was her bobbin sensor. So most of you have the ability to turn that off.
It was her needle, actually.
Oh, and then how many of you have ever experienced this? You look at your machine and your needle is straight on like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you realize that your needle can bend front to back too? So I've had that happen where you get let's say your top thread gets caught on something and your thread snaps and it never works right again. Well, if you go to the side of your machine and you look at it sideways, that needle has bent front to back. And it's not going to stitch right if that happens. So anytime you get like a thread catching or something like that happening, double check your needle and make sure that not only is it straight this way, but that it's straight this way. And it never hurts to replace a needle. That's the cheapest part of the whole equation. And it can cause you a lot of grief and a lot of upset if you can't get your machine to work right because you don't replace the needle. So it's always rethread, replace the needle. Don't forget, these are computerized machines. So what are we going to do if it's not playing nice? Turn it off and turn it back on. Reset it. Those are just the 3 things I would do. Those are the 3 things I would have you do before you call us and say, I'm frustrated. It's not working.
Or crying.
Or crying. Yes, we don't like it when you call us crying. That's never a good way to go. Okay. Any questions? All right. You can email us. We will respond. I do want to talk about something just real quick. We are asking for a lot of grace and prayers coming into this next 6 weeks is going to be a little bit on the rough side. Many of you know that my mom is really sick, but the truth is that she has stage 4 ovarian cancer. And she's in chemotherapy right now, which is not working. I mean, it's working, but it's really hard for her. And so yesterday, for example, we were getting ready to start this and her caregiver called and said, I'm calling 911. And I said, well, I'm going to teach the class. She's in good hands. I'll go see her when we're done. It's really hard. That's really hard. So we've got that going on. We pray for the best and hope for the best and do the best we can. Chris decided. We say that jokingly because she didn't really have a choice about this, but she had a knee replacement 12 years ago. Well, it has deteriorated, and her knee surgeon said, "Oh, yeah, we're going to replace that." She said, "Great. How about after the first of the year?" And he's like, "No, we're going to do it now." So she's going to be out October 10th to December 1st, and so it's really going to be me and Robin and Aaron and my husband. Now, Aaron and my husband are both wonderful, but they are useless in the store. I'm sorry.
They're not real.
There is a reason. There is a reason they're in the annex across the street. They do amazing work, but they are boys, and they don't always play nice with others. So we're just asking for some grace and for your patience while we get through this little wave that's coming. We know it's coming, and we're just going to do the very best we can and help you as much as we can. So that's all I've got for today. If you've got questions, let us know. Otherwise, happy embroidering, happy stitching, and we will look forward to seeing you next month.
Isn't that where I'm taking my vacation, October through December?
Thank you.
Probably.
Okay.
All right.
Will you have access to those Zoom files?
Yeah, that's why we recorded them and we're going to send you the link for it today so that you can watch it again because it's a lot of information, and I already know it. I don't know it all. I think we've covered that. I know it because I've been working on it. It's not even that I know it all. It's just I've been working ahead.
That makes a difference.